beasts and torn by dogs. They were crucified. They were wrapped in tar cloth and set on fire. Their, quote, hatred of the human race, close quote, was held enough to convict them of this incendiarism, or at all events to justify their punishment. The tendency of the Roman populace to wreak on the Christians the wrath they felt at some civic or national misfortune appears here for the first time. Yet for some time after Nero we hear no more of persecution of Christians. Even Domitian, whom Tertullian calls a quote, chip of Nero for cruelty, close quote, does not appear to have treated Christians with much greater cruelty than the rest of his subjects. According to some authorities, it was in this reign that the Apostle John was immersed in boiling oil uninjured and banished to Patmos. That a Flavius Clemens was executed by order of Domitian is an historical fact, but we have no authority for identifying him with Clemens, the bishop of the Roman Church. In fact, in the authentic records of Domitian's reign, the charge of Christianity is nowhere put forward distinctly as a reason for the executions ordered by the tyrant, though the atheism and superstition attributed to some of his victims may very possibly be heathen distortions of their Christianity. It is of course only too probable that Christians suffered from outbreaks of popular fury both in Rome and in the provinces, but we meet with no distinct mention of any action of the state against them until the time of Trajan. It was to him that Pliny the Younger, much perplexed at the number of Christians discovered in his government of Bithynia, wrote his famous letter. Was he asked the emperor, to punish Christians as such, even if they were guilty of no offense against public law or morality? He himself held that it was his duty to punish those who admitted themselves Christians, and could not be frightened into recanting. For, he said, whatever their superstition might be, they deserved punishment for their obstinacy. Those who consented to worship the gods and the statue of the emperor in a form prescribed by himself, and to curse Christ, he at once dismissed. After putting 2 deaconesses to the torture, he discovered nothing but a perverse and extravagant superstition. Trajan approved in general Pliny's proceedings, and laid down for his guidance the principle that no search should be made for Christians, but that those who were brought to the bar should be punished with death unless they proved their paganism by sacrificing to the gods. Anonymous accusations were to be altogether disregarded. Trajan carefully limited his decision to the particular case and locality. Still, the emperor's rescript furnished a fatal precedent. Henceforth, whenever the magistrates were disposed to persecute Christians, there seems to have been no difficulty in finding law against them. Under Trajan, too, we hear the ominous cry, "The Christians to the lions!" There was no security against the rage of Jews or heathen. The aged Simeon, bishop of Jerusalem, is said to have been crucified to gratify the former. The fury of the populace of Antioch caused Ignatius to be torn by lions in the Colosseum as a spectacle for the latter. When Christianity itself was recognized as a crime, informers were not wanting, so that even when the emperors were not active persecutors, Christians still suffered from the unreasonable hatred of their pagan neighbors. As the mob of the towns fell into the habit of shouting for the blood of Christians for their own amusement, or as an offering to the gods in time of public calamity, Hadrian issued an edict against these riots, and required that in all cases proceedings against the Christians should be conducted with the due forms of law. The excellent Antonius Pius is not commonly regarded as a persecutor, and has the reputation of a kind and just ruler both in pagan and Christian authorities. Yet it is not altogether improbable that it was in his reign that Justin gained the title of martyr in Rome itself, being put to death by Urbicus, the prefect of the city, mainly in consequence of the hostility of one Crescens, a cynic, whom he had denounced as a charlatan, and that in his reign also Polycarp, the venerable bishop of Smyrna, was brought to the stake in his own city. The successor of Antoninus, Marcus Aurelius, the throned Stoic, disliked religious excitement in general, and the enthusiasm of the Christians in particular. The wise man should, he thought, endure with patience the thought of extinction after death, and pass out of life undemonstratively. However little belief he had in the old Roman religion, he thought it for the good of the state that it should be maintained. The proceedings of provincial governors against the Christians were at least unhindered, if they were not actually prompted and encouraged by the emperor. A terrible persecution befell the churches of Lyon and Vienne. In this case, the fury of the populace appears to have been unchecked by the magistrates, and even illegal methods of proceeding were permitted. It was in this storm that the venerable Bishop Pontanus of Lyon died. Still, in spite of losses by death and desertion, a remnant was left, and these told their own pathetic story in a letter to the churches of Asia and Phrygia. To this reign is assigned the miracle of the Thundering Legion, composed partly of Christians, who in the campaign against Marcomanni and Catti are said to have procured rain by their prayers when the imperial army was suffering the last extremity of thirst. The brutal Commodus, the son of the philosopher, is said to have been influenced by his mistress Marcia in favour of Christianity, which accordingly made way among the higher classes of Rome. Yet it was under him that Apollonius, a man of high station and distinguished culture, was put to death, together with the slave his accuser. The reign of Septimius Severus, in other respects also an important epoch, changed the relation of the state to Christianity. He was an African, his wife, Julia Domna, a Syrian, and the emperors of their race, Caracalla Elagabalus and Alexander Severus, were much more oriental than Roman. Men such as these had not the same feeling in favour of the Roman state religion, which had so strongly influenced the Antonines. They rather regarded with interest strange forms of belief and worship. Yet Septimius is reckoned among the persecutors. He referred all cases of holding unlawful assemblies to the judgment of the prefect of the city, and forbade with equal sternness conversions to Christianity and to Judaism. Confiscation, torture, and death befell many Christians. In Alexandria and proconsular Africa in particular, the persecution was so severe that men thought the times of Antichrist nigh at hand. Leonides, the father of Origen, Ptolemena with her mother Marcella, and the soldier Basilides, who was her guard, were put to death in this persecution. Still more famous martyrs of this epoch are the young matrons Perpetua and Felicitas of Carthage, and the 12 martyrs of Silite in Africa, who bore their testimony before the proconsul Vigilius Saturninus. Elagabalus was himself a dilettante in religion, and tolerated both the Jewish and the Christian fraternities, intending, however, in the end, to permit in Rome no worship but that of Elagabalus. The emperor Alexander Severus, casting about for objects of veneration in a faithless time, formed a kind of private chapel in which, with Abraham, Orpheus, and Apollonius of Tyana, he set up a bust of Christ. Nay, he is said even to have contemplated building a temple to his honour, and adopting Christ among the gods of Rome. His mother, Julia Mamaea, when staying at Antioch, summoned to her presence the great Origen, of whose fame she had heard. Such an emperor was not likely to be an active persecutor. He practically recognized the right of the Christians to exist and worship in the empire. The laws against Christians were not repealed, but in spite of the existence of these laws, there were for some years no persecution except a transitory one under Maximin, who was ready to persecute whatever his predecessor had favoured. One emperor, Philip the Arabian, is even said to have been a Christian. Christianity was now in the popular estimation no longer the foul superstition that it once had been. It had attracted many of the wealthy and educated class. It had come to be regarded as a religion whose claims must at least be considered. There was no intrinsic reason why it should not take an equal rank with other permitted religions. With Decius came again a change. By this time the growth of the